Good evening, friends. Good evening, fiends. Good evening, Dovahkiin Supremes. Welcome to A Bit Late. It's me, A Bit Frank here, and tonight things are getting real nerdy. I've been playing Skyrim quite a bit, probably too much, and it started bleeding over into every area of my life, so I thought I'd bring it here too. So, tonight we are reading books 1 and 2 of the 4-part in-game book series, The Adventures of Eslaf Erol by in-game Reven, Beggar, and Thief. We'll get to the other 2 books, Warrior and King, in another video. So basically tonight is parts 1 of 2 of a 4-part book series. Cool. And along the way we are going to try to level up some combat skills. Maybe we can fight the nightmares a little bit better. Who can say? Anyway, let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? Beggar by Reven. Eslaf Erol was the last of the litter of 5 born to the queen of the prosperous Nordic kingdom of Erolgard, Lafracopa, and her husband, the king of Erolgard, Udlaf. During pregnancy, the queen had been more than twice as wide as she was tall. Ooh, that's rough. And the act of delivery took 3 months and 6 days after it had begun. No thank you, oh my. It is perhaps understandable that Lafracopa elected, upon expelling Eslaf, to frown and say, "Good riddance," and die. Oh, cruel world, I suppose. That's a lot of kids at one go. Like many Nords, Udlaf did not care very much for his wife and less for his children. Did not know that about Nords, and man, that's kind of a bummer. Anyway, his subjects were puzzled, therefore, when he announced that he would follow the ancient traditions of his people at Mora, of following his beloved spouse to the grave. They had not thought they were particularly in love, nor were they aware that such a tradition existed. Still, the simple people were grateful, for the little royal drama alleviated their boredom, which was and is a common problem in the more obscure parts of northern Skyrim, particularly in wintertide. He gathered his household staff and his 5 fat, brawling little heirs in front of him, and divided his estate. To his son Yunno, he gave his title. To his son Lanru, he gave his land. To his son Suibud, he gave his fortune. To his daughter Lasividra, he gave his army. Udlaf's advisors had suggested he keep the inheritance together for the good of the kingdom, but Udlaf did not particularly care for his advisors, or the kingdom for that matter. Upon making his announcement, he drew his dagger across his throat. Probably should have put in a warning about that. I'm sorry. One of the nurses, who was rather shy, finally decided to speak as the king's life ebbed away. "Your Highness, you forgot your 5th child, little Eslaf." Good Udlaf groaned. It is somewhat hard to concentrate with blood gushing from one's throat, after all. I would imagine so, geez. The king tried in vain to think of something to bequeath, but there was nothing left. Ooh, poor timing and tough luck, little one. Finally, he sputtered irritably. Eslaf should have taken something then, and died. That a babe but a few days old was expected to demand his rightful inheritance was arguably unfair. But so Eslaf Erol was given his birthright with his father's dying breath. He would have nothing but what he had taken. Since no one would have him, the shy nurse, whose name was Drusba, took the baby home. It was a decrepit little shack, and over the years that followed, it became more and more decrepit. Unable to find work, Drusba sold all of her furnishings to buy food for little Eslaf. By the time he was old enough to walk and talk, she had sold the walls and the roof as well, so that they had nothing but a floor to call home. And if you've ever been to Skyrim, you can appreciate that that is scarcely sufficient. Ooh, that's really, really rough. She probably sold the blankets too, so I don't know, that's some thick skin, man. Drusba did not tell Eslaf the story of his birth, or that his brothers and sister were leading quite nice lives with their inheritances. For, as we have said, she was rather shy and found it difficult to broach the subject. But even still, right? Wouldn't you want to say something? She was so painfully shy, in fact, that whenever he asked any questions about where he came from, Drusba would run away. That was more or less her answer to everything, to flee. Except for her answer with him, she actually took responsibility for the little kid. Anyway, in order to communicate with her at all, Eslaf learned how to run almost as soon as he could walk. He couldn't keep up with his adopted mother at first, but in time he learned to go toe-heel if he anticipated a short but fast sprint, and heel toe if it seemed Drusba was headed for a long-distance marathon flight. He never did get all the answers he needed from her, but Eslaf did learn how to run. And I've picked up something too. I did not know the different ways of running. I'm a biker. The kingdom of Erelgard had, in the years that Eslaf was growing, become quite a grim place. King Unop did not have a treasury, for Suibut had been given that. He did not have an army to protect the people, for Lasivitra had been given that. Furthermore, as he was but a child, all decisions in the kingdom went through Unop's rather corrupt council. It had become a bureaucratic, exploitive land of high taxes, rampant crime, and regular incursions from neighboring kingdoms. Not a particularly unusual situation for a kingdom of Tamriel, but an unpleasant one nonetheless. The time had finally come when the tax collector arrived to Drizba's hovel, such as it was, to collect the only thing he could, the floor. Rather than protest, the poor shy maid ran away, and Eslaf never saw her again. But wouldn't tax be proportional to the income? I mean, maybe that's not how it was in Skyrim when this was written, but I mean, that seems weird. Anyway, running away from the problem, Drizba, running away. Without a home or a mother, Eslaf did not know what to do. He had grown accustomed to the cold open air in Drizba's shack, but he was hungry. If you can call it a shack because it was just a floor. "May I have a piece of meat?" he asked a butcher down the streets. "I am very hungry." The man had known the boy for years, often spoke to his wife about how sorry he felt for him growing up in a home with no ceilings or walls. He smiled at Eslaf and said, "Go away or I'll hit you." Nice guy. Eslaf hurriedly left the butcher and went to a nearby tavern. The tavern keeper had been a former valet in the king's court and knew that the boy was by right a prince. Many times he had seen the poor ragged lad in the street and sighed the way fate had treated him. "May I have something to eat?" Eslaf asked the tavern keeper. "I'm very hungry." "You're lucky I don't cook you up and eat you," replied the tavern keeper. Also a nice guy. Both these guys are pitying the kid, but terribly mean to him. Yeesh. Eslaf hurriedly left the tavern. For the rest of the day, the boy approached the good citizens of Erelgard, begging for food. One person had thrown something at him, but it turned out to be an inedible rock. Cool. As night fell, a raggedy man came up to Eslaf and, without saying a word, handed him a piece of fruit and a piece of dried meat. The lad took it wide-eyed as he devoured it. He thanked the man very sweetly. "If I see you begging on the streets tomorrow," the man growled, "I'll kill you myself. There are only so many beggars we have the guild allow in any one town, and you make it one too many. You're ruining business." Also a nice guy. It was a good thing Eslaf Erol knew how to run. He ran all night. Eslaf Erol's story is continued in the book Thief, which, hooray, we're reading next. Stick around. Get a little bit more comfortable and a little more cozy. Oh, and because we've completed Beggar, you get a permanent increase to your athletic skill if you're playing Oblivion, and your pickpocketing skill has increased in Skyrim. Use those powers for good, my friends and fiends and Night Owl Supremes. The second book in Reven's series, Thief. If the reader has not yet had the pleasure of reading the first volume in this series on the life of Eslaf Erol, Beggar, they should close this book immediately, for I shan't recap. And lucky for us, we just read it, so we should be in the clear. I will tell you this much, gentle reader, or listener. When we last saw Eslaf, he was a boy, an orphan, a failed beggar, running through the wildly winter woods of Skyrim, away from his home of Erelgard. He continued running, stopping here and there for many more years, until he was a young man. Eslaf discovered that among the ways of getting food, asking for it was the most troublesome. Far easier was it finding it in the wilderness or taking it from unguarded market stalls. The only thing worse than begging to get food was begging for the opportunity to work for the money to buy it. That seemed needlessly complicated. No, as far as Eslaf was concerned, he was best off being a scavenger, a beggar, a thief. He committed his first act of thievery shortly after leaving Erelgard. While in the southern woods of Tambakar in the rugged land near Mount Jensen just east of the village of Horbeld, Eslaf was starving, having not eaten anything but a rather scrawny raw squirrel in 4 days, and he smelled meat cooking and then found the smoke. A band of minstrel bards was making camp. He watched them from the bushes as they cooked, and joked, and flirted, and sang. He could have asked them for some food, but so many others had refused him before. Instead, he rushed out, grabbed a piece of meat from the fire, and, wincing from the burns, scrambled up the nearest tree to devour it while the bard stood under him and laughed. "What is your next move, thief?" giggled a fair red-headed woman who was covered with tattoos. "How do you intend to disappear without us catching and punishing you?" As the hunger subsided, Eslaf realized she was right. The only way to get out of the tree without falling in their midst was to take the branch down to where it hung over a creek. It was a drop-off of a cliff about 50 feet. That seemed like the wisest strategy, so Eslaf began crawling in that direction. "You know how to fall, boy?" called out a young Khajiit, but a few years older than Eslaf, thin but muscular, graceful in his slightest movements. "If you don't, you should just climb down here and take what's coming to you. It's idiotic to break your neck when we just give you some bruises and send you on your way." "Of course I know how to fall," Eslaf called back, but he didn't. He just thought the trick of falling was to have nothing underneath you and let nature take its course. But 50 feet up, when you're looking down, is enough to give anyone pause. Yes, fear of heights will get you. "I'm sorry to doubt your abilities, Master Thief," said the young Khajiit, grinning. "Obviously you know how to fall feet first with your body straight but loose to avoid cracking like an egg. It seems you are destined to escape us." Eslaf wisely followed the Khajiit's hints and leapt into the river, falling without much grace but without hurting himself. In the years that followed, he had to make several more drops from even greater heights, usually after a theft, sometimes without water beneath him, and he improved the basic technique. When he arrived in the western town of Jallenheim on the morning of his 21st birthday, it didn't take him long to find out who was the richest person, most deserving of being burgled. An impregnable palace in the park near the center of town was owned by a mysterious young man named Soybud. Eslaf wasted no time in finding the palace and watching it. A fortified palace, he had come to learn, was like a person with quirks and habits beneath its hard shell. Ooh, I really like that. It was not an old palace. Evidently, whatever money the Soybud had come into was fairly recent. It was regularly patrolled by guards, implying that the rich man was fearful of being burgled. With good reason. The most distinctive feature of the palace was its tower, rising 100 feet above the stone walls, doubtless giving the occupant a good defensive view. Eslaf guessed that if Soybud was as paranoid as he guessed him to be, the tower would also provide a view to the palace storehouse. The rich man would want to keep an eye on his fortune. That meant that the loot couldn't be directly beneath the tower, but somewhere in the courtyard within the walls. The light in the tower shone all night long, so Eslaf boldly decided that the best time to burgle was by the light of day, when Soybud must sleep. That would be the time the guards would least expect a thief to pounce. Very observant. And so when the noon sun was shining over the palace, Eslaf quickly scaled the wall near the front gate and waited, hidden in the crenellations. The interior courtyard was plain and desolate, with few places to hide, but he saw that there were 2 wells. One the guards used from time to time to draw water up and slake their thirst, but Eslaf noticed that the guards would pass by the other well, never using it. He waited until the guards were distracted, just for a second, by the arrival of a merchant in a wagon bearing goods for the palace. While they were searching his wagon, Eslaf leapt elegantly, feet first, from the wall into the well. He's elegant now. It was not a particularly soft landing, for, as Eslaf had guessed, the well was not full of water, but gold. Still, he knew how to roll after a fall and he didn't hurt himself. In the dank, subterranean storehouse, he stuffed his pockets with gold and was about to go to the door, which he assumed would lead to the tower, when he noticed a gem the size of an apple, worth more than all the gold that was left. Eslaf found room for it down his pants. Because he's a guy, he probably has pockets. Like, I want pockets in my pants. Like, usable pockets. Or he stuffed it somewhere else where the sun don't shine and I don't want to know. The door did indeed lead to the tower, and Eslaf followed its curving stairwell up, walking quietly but quickly. At the top, he found the master of the palace's private quarters, ornate and cold, with invaluable artwork and decorative swords and shields on the walls. Eslaf assumed the snoring lump under the sheets was Soybud, but he didn't investigate too closely. He crept to the windows and looked out. It was going to be a difficult fall, for certs. He needed to jump from the tower, past the walls, and hit the tree on the other side. The branches would hurt, but they would break his fall, and there was a pile of hay he had left under the tree to prevent further injury. Eslaf was about to leap when the occupant of the room woke up with a start, yelling, "My gem!" Eslaf stared at him for a second, wide-eyed. They looked alike. Not surprising, since they were brothers. Dun dun dun. Eslaf Erol's story is continued in the book Warrior, which we shall read next. But do take an increase to your acrobatics if you're playing Oblivion, and your pickpocketing skill has increased a further bit if you're playing Skyrim. Again, use these powers for good. And that concludes tonight's stories, Beggar and Thief. I'm so excited to continue this adventure with you in Warrior and King, so do keep an ear out for those stories here. Now, off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again, and until then, Fus Rota, my friends. Good night.